Hey, peace and blessings to you. My name is Jerry B. I am the entree musician, but you know what? So are you. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Entree Musician. You are going to completely enjoy the conversation we're having today. Now, I got to bring this brother up on screen. I got to say this before I say hello, because you hear these things all the time. You hear songwriter, producer, arranger, recording and mix engineer, videographer, vocal arranger, visionary. You hear these things all the time, but I can tell you one thing about this brother right here. He really is all of these descriptions and does them very well and successfully. This brother has been in the business 30 years. He's worked with Will Downing, Gerald Albright, Lalah, who needs no last name, Onaje Allan Gumbs, and many, many others, including work as a background singer on a Grammy-winning folk album. This is none other than Tyrone Corbett. Many blessings to you, brother. How you doing today?
Brother, with that introduction, I need to come every day to get that kind of energy, man. You know, you're not expecting a check or something, are you?
No, man, I'm just giving it up. You give honor where honor is due. And we call this the Entree Musician, and we have to call you the ultimate Entree Musician because you've really been cleaning up, man. Thank you.
Oh, man, thanks so kindly. I really appreciate it, and for having me on the show.
Absolutely. It's been great. We met through LinkedIn, and you blessed us on our other platform, Artist Impact, for standing in for one of your artists. And I just thought, with a brother of your credentials, if we could have a conversation and you could share some of your knowledge with those who watch and listen to this podcast, and we could all learn together. You know what I mean?
Oh, man, sounds like a winner.
So let's start from the outside in. The Tyrone Corbett Music Group. Is this a label? Is it a production company? Is it an artist development company? What is it?
It's all of the above. As you said, I've been in the business some 30 plus years, and there's been an evolution, a continued evolution, which is quite honestly, Jerry, is one of the things I attribute my success to is the willingness to continue to evolve. Yeah. If you don't evolve, the business moves on. And even when you do, the business can move on. But the best thing you can do is to try to continue to grow with it. So with the Corbett Music Group, it's interesting, the acronym TCMG is a great example of what my growth has been, because it started as the Corbett Music Group. Now there's a layer called the Corbett Media Group. Right. So those same initials seem to cover the spectrum.
So you really are an entree musician. And we were talking offline a couple weeks ago about doing it all. And you had an incredible perspective on doing it all, because of course there are layers, because you kind of evolve as you go along, but then you also expressed a danger or a caution, I should say, in doing it all. Would you like to share that?
Well, yeah, I think we talked about the last time that a great part of my career, again, has been this evolution in wearing hats that I didn't always seek to wear, but I found that they were important for me to move forward. But one of the things I shared as well is, while you want to wear a lot of hats, if you can, to, push yourself forward, you don't want to get in over your head. And I find that many musicians, singers, songwriter, et cetera, they try to do work that in some cases they're not capable of. And you can do yourself a big disservice trying to do it all.
Yes. That's absolutely right. I think a perfect example that you quoted and is even posted on your website, I think you talked about music publishing, the Poison aspect of it, and Whitney Houston, what Clive Davis said about Whitney Houston. Do you recall that?
Yeah. It's such an incredible thing when you're really learning those aspects and those pitfalls to try to not to make those mistakes yourself. Yeah. One of the things that I often share is what Clive said about Whitney, in that Whitney had come to him, and I think this was as a result of a manager or someone saying, hey, there's all this publishing money. Right. You can grab some of that. And So she approached Clive about it and said, I'd like to write. And Clive's position was, if you can bring me a You Give Good Love, the greatest love of all, if you can do those things, that's fine.
Sure.
But the one thing that I think people often miss, with Whitney is, although she didn't write anything, of course, she carved out an incredible career, and she was able to deliver those songs in such a way that even without being a writer, again, you would almost think that she had written the way she poured into them, which, if I might share this with you, is something else that I found with a lot of musicians I've worked with along the way, particularly singers. I've had people come to my studio and, they've told me, well, I can only sing my own songs, because it's not authentic. And it's not true, Jerry. And it's to me, it's a crutch. Because again, one of the examples I often give is the Whitney example again, because while she wrote nothing as an interpreter, she sung all those songs beautifully. So when I hear artists tell me the only work I can do is my own, it's kind of built in that they've learned that, again, writing is a means of income.
Yes.
And I don't begrudge that. It's a part of the business, and certainly take advantage of it. But again, don't do yourself a disservice by trying to do something you can't.
No, you're absolutely right on that. I thought when I read that article, and even we talked about it before I actually went to the website and read it, but I just thought, man, what an excellent example of that. But now, within your own career, Tyrone, how did you begin in the business? Did you start as a singer? Did you start as a songwriter? Or what actually got you into the game?
Well, I started as a singer. As a young child, my father, who was known as the street preacher, he really was an activist during the 60s, and he often took my brother and I out. He would speak, and he'd have my brother and I on a little soapbox, singing. So singing had been a part of my life, from a very young age. And I often say this to people as well, by the way, Jerry, is because you do something very young doesn't always mean you were very good at it. I
understand.
And so,
Absolutely.
and mom and dad may love it, but you kind of have to use some self editing on all of it. But I did start as a singer. And from that time of being a young child, I think in high school, I started taking things a little bit more significantly in terms of possible career path. I actually was a big tennis guy and was taught by Randy Ashe, Arthur Ashe's cousin in Virginia.
Wow.
And I started college as not only a history poli-sci major, but I started on a tennis scholarship. And I quickly, probably my second year in college, I decided I wanted to become a music major. And I told my parents, and I often tell a story that I ducked when I said, hey, I'd like to change my major from history, political science to music. But they were actually very, very, very supportive. My father just said to me, son, make sure you put yourself in a position where if music or entertainment doesn't work for you, you are able to do something else. And by the way, that leads me to another point, Jerry, that I think you'll appreciate.
Yes.
I have been told by many and many successful musicians that there is no plan B. The great part of the success is they only chose the path of A. And I disagree with that vehemently. While all our paths can be different, I've had friends whose success has rivaled mine, who took that path. But as time went on and they fell out of the business, they found that they had nothing else that they could do because it was the only thing they did. Now, don't get me wrong. I think dedication and commitment obviously is hugely important in this business and industry, but I've always had a plan B, and in part, that's why I've continued to evolve.
Yes. Yes, no, that's excellent advice and excellent information. I've walked the tightrope of that personally by saying, okay, be absolutely committed. There's no plan B. You jump in on the deep end and you swim or you sink. But it's terrible to sink, so you definitely need
And
a
I
life
think you
preserver. You
can
know what I
be.
mean?
I not to cut across you, but I think you
Sure.
can be totally committed and have a B. I just think
Yeah.
that's sometimes for me. I call that the barbershop bravado,
Mm.
where you hear these things and yes, you have to do this
Yeah.
and I don't subscribe to those things. I'm not saying the path I've taken is the only path there
Sure.
is, but again, I've watched people who've trumped my success but are no longer in the industry and I've somehow found a way to continue to be viable. And I don't say
Understood.
that in an arrogant way, but
Certainly.
I do say it in terms of I have committed myself to this business.
Yeah.
And whether it's from a songwriting perspective, a production perspective, again, those things continue to grow for me.
So, what was your journey then as you began as a singer? What was the next flow? Was it writing your first song? Was it getting in the studio and twisting knobs? Or what was the journey like?
Well, I wrote a lot of songs starting in high school and college that weren't very good. I'm always honest about that because it's important. It's part of the journey. It's part of the
Yeah.
learning experience. My mother loved the songs, my father, my friends, but I knew they weren't very good, but I had a passion to continue. So I purchased a little 4-track studio. I'm always been kind of technically inclined, but I did purchase a little 4-track studio to try to get my ideas out.
Was it
And in some
Tascam or
cases,
Fostex? I got to ask.
oh,
Tascam or
Tascam or
Fostex?
Fostex. It was neither. What was
No?
it? I can't remember now.
Mm.
There may have been a Fostex along the way.
Okay.
But it was something that was only, 4 channels, a
Right.
few $100s that I
Right.
could land myself in. And that's another thing. I tell people, use the equipment you have. One of the
That's
best
correct.
pieces of advice I was given it was shared by my mentor that people typically only learn to use about 20% of whatever gear is they have. And
Amazing.
then they look towards the next purchase. So
Yeah.
that's another thing. I've always tried to stay with the gear.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was tweaking knobs, having some fun.
Right.
And that was, like I said, high school and college. But once I got to college, that's when things really developed. I met some friends, my lifelong friends and brothers, Carl Lester L., who's from New Jersey. It's interesting. I'm from Virginia. He was from New Jersey. I wound up migrating up north to New Jersey. He stayed in Virginia. But Carl is a wonderful musician. He's played with Regina Bell, Gerald Albright, many, many, many others as well. And we formed a band together. And it was he, I, and another dear friend, Lance Dickerson. And so we started performing. We got, they were far more talented than I. I always was very honest. I felt like I was the oddball trying to fit in, even as the singer, because I respected their level of musicianship. So I paid attention, even being a singer, to what they brought to the table. But
Yeah.
anyway, during college, we started touring and opening up for acts like Entombed, quite a few others, the SOS Band. And so through those experiences, it really sort of cemented my position of, okay, this is really what I want to do.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, how did you move into the realm of being a videographer? Oh, I mean, what? Because the the videos that you shoot are crystal clear, the lighting is on point. How'd you put that into the mix?
Wow. And the videographer is the last of the things. I'm not saying it's the last that I'll learn to do,
Sure.
but that's really been my most recent kind of discovery. I'd been shooting, playing around with my iPhone, which you can do amazing things with. I mean, the
That's true.
technology, has come a long way. So I was playing around with videos with my iPhone, but this past year, I made my first purchase, a camera, and then that camera turned into 2 cameras and cinema lenses. And, I have this tendency that if I'm gonna do something, I really want to understand it and I want to do it right.
Yeah.
Because Jerry, no matter where we are, even if, we have modest productions facilities, we are compared intentionally and sometimes not so much. You're compared to what A-list work is.
Yeah.
So part of my ethic has always been, while I'm not in $1 million facility, while I don't own a $30,000 camera,
Yeah.
I learned that you can do impressive work, on modest gear if, as my mentor taught me, you really learn the gear.
Yes.
But I feel it's important that we do that work. And that leads me to something, Jerry, that I want to share that I think is uber important.
Yes, sir.
Again, that thing about wearing these hats and doing these things, part of what I see a lot of artists suffer from is the fact that they truly aren't aware that they may not have those abilities that they think they have. And I've watched so many, and the artists that I've groomed or worked with, I've always tried to share with them that you have to make sure you understand that work is clear, but it's not in many instances. And I'll share this example with you. I had a young man that was brought to my studio that I was told was very talented. And he sat down, he sang for me, he played some tracks, and his singing was okay. The tracks were very bare. And again, not in a negative way, but I listened. And by the way, I always try to be encouraging.
Sure.
You don't want to be destructive with someone.
Sure.
You want to give them the tools to increase.
Right.
But this conversation started and he said, well, what do you think about my work? What do you really think about my work? And if you ask, I think, it is incumbent to be honest. Again, not cruel, but honest.
Of course.
And I told him, I said, well, I think you show some massive talent, but I think there are some holes that need to be shored up. Of course, this made him feel a little uneasy. And he said, well, my tracks are like the Neptune tracks. And I think some of the Neptune's tracks are weak. And I looked at him and I said, well, that may be so. But the industry has accepted their tracks.
Yes.
They're not going to accept your weak tracks. And again, I didn't say it to be,
Sure.
mean or anything. But since he gave that example, my point was, it's a larger point, actually, that it is very true that many find success whose talents may often be mediocre.
Right.
That is a fact. And I think that really muddies the waters for artists who are pursuing a career, because they do look at some of these artists that are superstars and go, well, yeah, they're not that talented.
Right.
But my response still to that is correct, but you don't want that to be the thing that you're hanging your hat on to get into the industry, because they only let a few in. And, I found that if you want to be let in the door, and even if you do these things, you still may not be. You have to find what is your lane. You can't compete with someone else, even when they're mediocre.
Yeah.
Sometimes their mediocrity has, hundreds of thousands of dollars and marketing behind them and all these other things. So it's a much larger picture than I think. And I understand that most artists don't see.
Sure. Now, you said a lot right there. The one thing is about making sure that you tell the truth. A lot of artists, at least I see in my area, have only been told the good things, family and friends, of course, and nobody's really listening with a critical ear. And when they get themselves into a position where they have a real professional listening to their work, they have to be able to accept what is critiqued and what is reviewed, because, that's how you grow. You grow with constructive criticism and making sure that you put the work in to tighten up and tweak the things that need to be done. It's
and that's
like that.
It's very true what you're saying, Jerry. I think, again, the waters get muddied from many perspectives. And I'll share another side that the waters are impressively muddy. A lot of times people who are in positions and who are decision makers may not be the most credible people as well. They found success and they found their ability to work with a label or a publishing company.
Yeah.
But, the information sometimes that they're sharing is not always on point. And what I tell artists is you really have to be grounded to understand what you're being told. You may be told
Absolutely.
that, hey, you're not good enough to be signed, when in all actuality, they don't have the ability to sign you. And they don't tell
My.
you that,
Wow. Yeah.
So again, the waters, it's such a complex circumstance that I see how artists get lost. It is a very easy thing because whether it's their deficits or the deficits of the industry and how it's constructed,
Yeah.
they're very difficult waters to navigate.
Well, let me ask you a very personal question to that end then. How did you stay grounded, knowing the complexities? You've been in the industry, you've worked with major label artists back to back to back, knowing the complexities, knowing that there can sometimes be a little shade on the other side
A
of the
lot of
glass,
shade.
I'm being modest, but with respect to those who have the ink pens who write the checks, how do you, Tyrone, keep your head in, the fog?
Well, number one, I try to keep a clear perspective of what I'm doing and how to get where I'm going.
Yeah.
I've always been a great, great, great fan of asking questions. I always say people, we're often fearful in any industry to acknowledge that you don't know something, but
True.
that's the most dangerous thing that can happen when you're not willing to say, hey, I don't know, and can you answer this? And for me, I have to be honest and generous about what I've been fortunate to have had in my career.
Yeah.
I have had great people who've mentored me. I've had great people who, set me down and were honest with me the same way and say, hey, I love what you're doing. But at the same time, here are some areas that you need to grow in. And
Gotcha.
by the way, I've always been a personal fan of just when I know I have a deficit and I see that you have an ability that, I'd like to acquire and shore up at least, I'm going to say, hey, Jerry,
Yeah.
would you mind if I sat with you? And by the way, Jerry, that's something that I see so rarely these days.
Yeah.
When I moved to New Jersey, one of the people I met and a very dear friend and mentor is a guy by the name of Joe Marno. And Joe was an engineer, songwriter, producer. He worked with from Whitney Houston to Freddie Jackson, I think Sting. I mean, so many people. And I was very fortunate that he was a friend and he took me under his wing.
Yeah.
So he mentored me for many years and taught me a lot of these things. So I've never been afraid to, sit back and say, hey, can I learn from you? It's
Absolutely.
important.
Now, it may be because of that sports, that tennis competition in you too, to make sure that you're tweaking it and getting it right
Well,
as
I
well.
think you are a sum total of everything you are. So
That's right.
could very well
That's
be
right.
true.
Absolutely. Now, I understand too, with respect to you sitting down with others, you offer a recording course from your studio as well. Is that still active?
Not as actively as it has been. I've been, on such a burning course between the songwriting, the production, the mixing. I've started a video interview series. Well, it's not released, but I've been, for the last year and a half, I've been traveling around the country, which is one of the things that I have to do when I leave here.
Yeah.
I'm at a record label event tonight, but that's turned into a great part of what I do, as well as following artists on their journeys to success.
Yes.
So the course teaching has not nearly been something that I've been able to even consider.
I see. I see. I saw it and I thought, yeah, this is something that is very well needed. You have inspired me to think about 2023, and maybe that's something that we can do here in this region as well. Because to understand what goes into production, and not just production in the construction of a song, but the way it's heard. the way sound works. All of these things are vital and important to being a musician, because when you walk into that studio for the first time, many singers are uncomfortable with their voice, not hearing it in that type of environment. And maybe they sang great in the shower, they sang excellently at church, but in the confines of the studio walls, it's a totally different environment, and it kind of freaks them out a little bit. But being able to be comfortable in that is something that I feel can be offered, ought to be offered. So I figured I'd ask you about that because I saw it on your website.
I love it because it leads me to somewhere that I like to go. First off, I'm going to say, while I'm not actively always doing the teaching thing, I'm always available if someone says, hey, I'd like to learn something, Tyrone, because I think that's important. I've been so fortunate in my career to have been mentored by some incredible people, and I have to give that back. I've always been that way. But one of the things you just said is something that I share with singers all the time, and that's there has to be a level of comfort in order to find great success, or great work. Let me say that first, because that's the first thing. You have to do the work. You have to be comfortable. Now, there are those who can come in and sing flat-footed and they have all the confidence in the world. I often tell artists I work with, you may be an incredible singer, but that may not be what this song requires. And that for me goes into what lyric and melody, the importance of it. Just because you have great skill sets doesn't mean they should be on this part of the record. There is performing live, and there is the recording studio.
That's correct.
So, a record is a timestamp of where you are. So oftentimes I'm, whether I'm working with great singers, and I've been very fortunate to work with some incredible singers like JD, who did the Bell Tolls for You. I work with Anwar Robinson, who was on American Idol, who did incredibly well. I'm currently working with Michael Lynch from American Idol, and he's done well. But the one thing that I try to impart to the singers as we're recording, two things actually, or a few things, Jerry. Number one, this is a journey we're taking together. Part of my job as a producer is to possibly take you somewhere you never considered going, because that's a part of insight. It's not that you don't have great ideas, but if we're working together on this, that's the goal. So when I start with a singer, I listen to them. Typically for my projects, I hire singers that I already know have the sound I'm looking for, because if I'm pitching something, and I was just sharing this the other day, people ask me, say, well, you're a singer, Tyrone, why would you pay anybody, and in such a slim business where money is slim? And I'll be honest with you, Jerry, I'm a very good singer and I can sound very young, but it doesn't mean that I'm the right singer for the job. And so I will hire a singer almost always. In fact, I would say 100% of the time for pitches, I will always hire a singer. Plus, I'm more comfortable behind the production board, meaning to even sculpt what they do. And certainly. J.D. Wesley is a great example, if I can share this.
Absolutely.
That boy can flat out sing.
Yeah, definitely.
There is nothing, and he has good studio chops. He has, great instinct. He has the package. Yet, and I'm sure he doesn't mind me sharing this, we spent a few days cutting the Bell Tolls for You. Not because he couldn't come in and just deliver it. He was incredible. But we both had this commitment to say, okay, what makes this special here? Let's see if we can find that, as opposed to where most of the industry is. Certainly. Hey, man, if I spend 3 hours, the vocal is done. Yeah, and I don't think that way. It's possible. It happens sometimes. But, Jerry, even with the most incredible singers, putting in the work in a recording session is a completely different thing than being able to sing.
That is so very, very good. And you want to rewind that part a few times to get it, especially if you were a singer. That's wonderful advice. And you prompted a question from me from the perspective of production. And we walked through the late 90s where well, let me back up. I grew up in an era, you may have grown up in the era in the 70s and the 80s, whereby the producer was exactly as described. It was the Russ Titleman, the Arif Martin, the Quincy Jones, to some perspective, that we're going to take this journey together. And then we went into the 90s thing where the producer was a superstar. So it really wasn't about the artist. It was about the producer who produced it. And, the artist was an afterthought. And I wanted to know what your perspective might have been, because when I listen to your productions, I think of you, my perspective of you is the one who's sitting behind the board, who's really the director of the movie, helping the artist along, because it really is about the artist, and it is about the song being conveyed in a way that's going to touch a lot of lives, other than, this is a Tyrone Corbett production and it's all on me. I mean, that's just what I hear through the recordings, but I wanted your perspective on that.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly who I am. It's, the people you mentioned, I happened to speak with Arif many years ago through happenstance, but they were people who I did not know growing up, but I became huge fans of as I became educated about the industry. And in terms of my production, that's exactly what I do, Jerry. The goal is, while, I may be wearing all of these hats, and with my partners, by the way, our goal is to make the artist it seem as though you're looking at this superstar who has it all together. And in most cases they do. Yeah. But we did go through that period that you mentioned about the 90s, and it became about the producer, and that became a huge business leg too. That's a whole separate conversation about what that did. Sure. But one of the things that, and I want to shout out one of my earlier writing partners, Robert Donzella. I worked with Bob, and he and I wrote some amazing songs together, but both of us had the perspective of, we wanted our company to be a place where artists came and we would allow them to shine. Although we were doing the work, they had this, the thought was, who are they? And the asterisk for that for me was, when I first met David Foster and Carole Bayer Sager, I met them both in a meeting together, which just blew me away. We were invited, my partner Bob and I, out to California to meet with them because they had heard some of our work. But the reason I shared is because it became something that continually and to this day is a part of my career. One of the things they said to us was, you guys are wonderful songwriters, but wait a minute. Who's writing this stuff? You can be honest. You're talented. We appreciate that. But your work is so diverse. And not only is it diverse, it's so on point. And lyrically, is the artist writing this? Are they sharing in this with you? And Jerry, it turned into a bit of a joke for a while, because, at least for me, because everyone would say, who's writing these songs? And at that point, and even now, we had a lot of what I didn't say, but what they called chick songs. And they said, well, wait a minute, the chick has to be writing this song. And it was a lot of pop, which I still write, a lot of pop R&B. But I wound up telling them that, I said, well, I'm the thin white chick. I was much heavier at the time, but I wasn't thin, I wasn't white, and I wasn't a chick. Right. But the work came from us. But they felt our work was so authentic that they said there must be someone else behind there. But the point, to circle all the way back to what you were saying, was we wanted it to sound authentically like the artist. We said, we're not trying to make, ourselves be the ones, who are in front, the driving force. Now, obviously, we wanted the credit, for the work on the back end. Certainly. But our job was, we felt it was very important to make the artist, whatever that work was, to make the artist sound like they wrote it themselves, and that which happened with David and Carole wound up happening, throughout my career. When I first met Babyface, he was listening to some of the songs and he said, wait a minute, who's writing this stuff? It sounds too on point. Then I met Bow-Legged Lou from Full Force, and these are all, they're from different facets of the industry.
In different
but
genres.
The same thing kept coming in. And I was very proud of the fact that when they listened to my songs and the work we were doing, they could hear only the artists. They said, these sound like artist-written songs. So that's been a part of my direct motive of what I prefer to do. I want it to sound authentic, which is why also I spend so much time in the studio, like I was sharing, even with great singers. Just because you sing great again doesn't mean that that is the right performance or the right disposition for this record.
That's exactly correct. No, you're right about that. And by the way, if you don't know, you're watching this and you don't know the name Arif Martin, you do know the name of Chaka Khan, and so the magic of the Chaka Khan records, especially as she was coming up after she left Rufus and whatnot, is because Arif took that time to like really craft her to be the woman that she is, bomb singer.
So
we all
true,
knew
Jerry.
that, but
and many artists have had that. We talk about the record companies, and there have been some cases where there would be some to say many and almost all cases where we're in a nefarious business.
Yes.
Not pointing at anyone.
Sure.
But one of the things that I like the record companies got right, I feel a lot of the time, not all the time, but they did have in many cases great A&R people.
Yes.
Great people who had the ability to pick songs. And that's, again, something that I think artists of today really suffer from, because they feel as though they can write it, they can produce it, they can do it all. And there is something beautiful about collaboration, which, by the way, is goes back to the 90s, as you mentioned, again, how things started to change with all the equipment and the technology.
Exactly.
That there became all of these, solo type, works.
Yes.
I always say this, Jerry, there are some people who are indeed incredible and can do it all.
Right.
I'm not one of them, by the way. Although I wear a lot of hats, I work with some incredible people, one of which my writing partner is Joe Gaida. He's an incredible guitarist. I've been working with him for 20 some odd years. Mm-hmm. The other is my other collaborator, Clarence Penn. Mm-hmm. He's a world-renowned jazz straight ahead drummer, by the way, which most artists can't swing both ways, not who's that heavy, but Penn has been one of my collaborators for same thing about 20 years. And because of our collective efforts is the result of the work. So I always want to be very clear, while I do wear a lot of hats, the work that I present is as a result of a beautiful partnership with some incredibly talented musicians, arrangers, and producers as well.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned JD earlier. Let's talk about some of the artists who are on your roster, because you do see a variety of artists as well as genres on your website. So do you want to highlight a few of them, mention them?
Well, I do quite a bit of one-shots with artists. Not that I don't want to do something more extensive, but some of the artists who are a part, when we say roster, they're not signed to me, but a part of my company are J.D. Wesley, Michael Lynch, Fabian Lance, who, again, Lance is one of my dear friends from Virginia that I met in college. And he actually heard one of the songs I'd written called The B-Side, which was with the lead vocal. And he said, Ty, I love the song. Would you mind if I do a piano rendition of this? And we redid the record with him as well. So shout out to Lance.
Hey, that's what's up. Now, who was the first major that you worked with, whether you were a background singer or collaborator? Was it Will Downing, or, who did you step into that light with?
A lot of the roads lead back to Will Downing. Dear friend, brother. I actually met Will at Virginia Union, where he came, and he was there for about a year or so. He was a music major, if I'm not mistaken. I was not. I was still history poli-sci. But Will has been a great part of my journey. He offered me, I'm trying to go back, my first professional touring opportunities. And not only have I toured with Will as a background singer, but I've written with him, I've engineered for him, I've provided vocals, whether on tour or on the record. So, yes, I started with Will Downing.
That's excellent. And how did that lead to the lovely Lalah Hathaway?
Well, when you work with the marvelous Will Dynamite Downing, you get introduced to a lot of people. And my work with Lalah, though very limited, one of the things I loved was the fact that I did a tour with Will. I think it was Will at the time, Gerald Albright, and Lalah, which was the first time, although like many, I'm a fan of. So, and let me share this story with you. One of the things I loved about Lalah was, sound checks, because, it's such a personal time. You're trying to get the sound right for the show. But one of the things I loved doing was when she was coming out to do her sound check, I'd go sit in the audience. The theater is empty. I'm sitting on the front row and I'm listening, to the incomparable Lalah Hathaway. And it's like, wow, what a front row seat.
Sure.
So through Will, again, I've had, a lot of opportunities. And by the way, Will has also been very, very kind to point me in the direction of things. I would consider him another one of my mentors. If I had a question or I needed something, I've learned so much from him.
Oh, that's absolutely excellent. Well, I absolutely appreciate the time that you've given us. I have 3 quick questions, though, because I know you got to.
And I'll try to give you 3 quick answers.
The first question, my friend, would be, what do you feel was the greatest experience that you've discovered in being a musician, and being an entree musician, and covering your world, so to speak? What has been that greatest experience that you can look to and go, that's why I'm here?
Wow. It's been a few, Jerry. But if I had to point to one in particular, was when I was invited out to meet Carole Bayer Sager and David Foster. Wow. You're talking about 2 legends of the industry.
Absolutely.
And by the way, they were so generous with their time. I was used to walking into labels and they played 30 seconds or less and move on to the next song.
Sure.
With my meeting with them, they listened to every song in its totality. So I found them to be unusual for what the experience was. So absolutely.
Wow. Well, what would you say then, in contrast, would be the greatest challenge that you encountered on your journey?
Well, the greatest challenge is always people who may tell you you don't have the right thing. And what I've learned through my many years in the industry is, again, that may not always be for the reasons that they suggest. Sadly, I've seen many situations where, and I share this with colleagues, where you're sending in songs and they say they're not listened to. Unfortunately, one of the sides of the business is I found that they are listening. And while a lot of times they may not, be interested in you, the work they're listening to very keenly. So, I've learned that that's a difficult challenge, because if you're not submitting your work, you're kind of working for yourself. But at the same time, I learned that you can be fueling other ideas by other people.
That's a great, great point. Finally, what do you think, Tyrone, is the most important lesson that music has taught you, and it's the first thing that you pass on to those who you are mentoring?
That's an easy one. Give back. You always have to give back. Again, I've been so very fortunate throughout my 30-year career to have people who mentor me, and I try my best in every situation to say, hey, if you want to learn, yes, I'm more than happy to help you out, to help you forward your career. I do find, Jerry, the asterisk on that is, sadly, I don't find that as many young people look for that as was in yesteryear.
I understand that. Yeah, I understand. I'm working with a young man, Jaron Brooks, who's 15 years old, though, who is hungry and willing to look to an old guy like me to say, but you're right. Out of those who are here in my neck of the woods, we got it. We got the TikTok. We know how to do it. It's happening. And there's confidence, and then there's arrogance. And sometimes, they don't
and it is a different business. it is a different business, by the way, with those models of TikTok. And I don't begrudge them, but yes, I do feel as though there are some lacking. And
Sure.
one of the things I question is how sufficient, as the industry again continues to change, how sufficient are those things that we learn that we feel are
Right.
pillars that the industry kind of changes around. So I try to be cognizant of that as well.
Certainly. And maybe this is the second interview that we do, because there's this thing that's called longevity that we've lost. It's now. But we're the Stevie Wonders. We're the Shaka Khans that we've mentioned. Where's the fact that Earth, Wind, and Fire was able to develop and hold it down? And then even after Maurice's passing, to still be able to draw breath from something that was significant.
Yeah.
That's
and
the
look,
next. That's the next conversation. Okay.
We're running out of time, but I'm gonna really quickly say something because it is important about that. One of the things that I've been learning as I'm going around doing this videography interview project, that there are actually far more musicians than I thought, and I consider myself a pretty knowledgeable and in their person, and I've been disappointed. But I'm finding there's some great things going on out here. So we'll talk about that next time.
We will. And I appreciate you even, considering the next time by virtue of how your schedule is, man. But this is Tyrone Corbett. You have to check him out. His website is below. We're grateful to know him. And I'm expecting that there's going to be, at least, talking about longevity, at least another 30 more years in the business for you, brother.
Hobbling, I hope so. And Jerry, let me say thank you
Certainly.
to you for providing this platform. I tell people all the time, no matter what we do, if there aren't people like yourself who are allowing us, to carry on that mantle or even promote what we're doing, it makes it far difficult. So I'm very appreciative of your allowing this time.
Well, absolutely. And we'll wait for the next time. We'll schedule it as soon as the cameras are off. But peace and blessings to you, Brother Tyrone, and peace and blessings to you, my dear friend. I knew you would enjoy this conversation. That's Tyrone Corbett. Go ahead and check out the breadth of music that he has. It is definitely dynamic. My name is Jerry B. I appreciate you joining us. I am the entree musician, but the most important thing is so are you. We will see you next time. God bless, my friend. Take care.